Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thanks once again for stopping by. It's deeply appreciated. My home thoughts returned to Thomas Pynchon. Yesterday I had to go to the launch of the British Chambers of Commerce in Kenya. And on the way I passed the bookseller and I'd asked him for all these Don DeLillo and Thomas Pynchon books, going backwards as it were, having read the recent ones. And he said, no, they haven't arrived yet. And I pottered around the shop. Then I discovered they had, and there were two of them. So I go back to Thomas Pynchon. I am the 20th century. I am the ragtime and the tango, sans serif, clean geometry. I'm the virgin hare's whip and the cunningly detailed shackles of decadent passion. I am very lonely. I am every lonely railway station in every capital of Europe. I am the street, the fanciless buildings of government, the café dansant, the clockwork figure, the jazz saxophone, the tourist lady's hairpiece, the fairy's rubber breasts, the travelling clock which always tells the wrong time and chimes in different keys. I am the dead palm tree, the Negroes dancing pumps, the dried fountain after tourist season. I am all the appurtenances of night. What goes around may come around, but it never ends up exactly at the same place. You ever notice? Like a record on a turntable, all it takes is one groove's difference, and the universe can be on into a whole another song. And this I find very powerful. Behind the hieroglyphic streets, there would either be a transcendent meaning or only the earth. Political reflections for a quarter of a century, this huge territory perched precariously between the EU and Russia, has been the object of a geopolitical contest between the Kremlin and the West. But the Maidan Revolution now offers a second chance for all parties to reconsider the status of Ukraine on the fault line of Europe. When the Soviet Union was collapsing in late 1991, Dick wanted to see the dismantlement not only of the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire, but of Russia itself, so it could never again be a threat to the rest of the world, wrote former US Secretary of Defense Robert Gates in his recently published memoirs. Gates was referring to the then Secretary of Defense, and later US Vice President Dick Cheney. As far back as 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote that without Ukraine, any attempt by Moscow to rebuild its influence on the territory of the former Soviet Union was doomed to fail. Under the headline, "After Ukraine, the West makes its move for the Russian periphery," and I thought, aiming for both peripheries, the Chinese Xinjiang and the Russian at the same time, was rather bold, I must say. Stratfor, which has close links to the US Secret Services, writes, the West wants to parlay the success of supporting Ukraine's anti-government protesters into a broader region-wide campaign. And former President Yanukovych himself was a representative of Ukrainian oligarchs. He only turned down the association agreement with the EU because he feared it would not politically survive the social consequences. Now his downfall serves as a pretext to introduce a level of poverty and exploitation totally incompatible with democratic norms and will lead to new social uprisings. It is precisely in order to suppress future social unrest that the fascist militias are to be retained. Worth thinking about. Hindu nationalist Narendra Modi is on course to win India's prime ministerial elections. I think the Congress party is toast, but I've been saying that for a while. I like these two photographs. One of the North Korean subway, commuters gather around a public newspaper stand on the train platform in Pyongyang, and the second one is people pay tribute to the bronze statues of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il in Pyongyang, North Korea. International markets, global stocks, bonds, commodities rose together in February for the first time in 7 months, reversing January's losses in equities and raw materials. and burning short sellers who bet on more declines. Commodities climbed the most since July as a drought in Brazil triggered rallies in coffee and in sugar. MSCI All-Country World Index of Stocks climbed 4.5%, including dividends in February, strongest advance in September. GSCI, the Commodity Index, Total Return Index of metals, fuels and farm products, gained 4.1% for the month as of February 27th. Benchmark stock indices in all 24 developed nations advanced in February, with Denmark, Greece, Ireland, Portugal rallying at least 9% to lead those gains. China jumped 7.3% and Dubai rallied 12%. And as Standard & Poor's 500 rebounded from a 3.6% drop in January, gaining 4% and reached a record. So you can see the markets actually, for all the noise in February, were rebounded. How far that rebound is going to continue for is an entirely another matter. Euro 137.00, dollar index 80.29, Japanese yen 101.79. I'm getting bullish about the yen, frankly. I think you might see 95. Swiss franc 0.8885. The pound 166.80. I'm looking for 180 levels. Aussie 0.8948. India rupee 62.125. South Korean won 1067.35. The rial 232.18. The Egyptian pound 696.15. The South African rand 1071.59. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart, last trading at 80.29. Trade soft, need to sit above 81.06. Euro dollar 137. That's remained resilient, notwithstanding the very low inflationary impulse in the European economy. Dollar yen 101.79. I fancy the yen has an outside chance of printing 95 at some point. Versace deal with Blackstone values group at €1 billion. Blackstone have taken a stake, and of course it's a pretty totemic, iconic brand, isn't it? I'll put up a photograph of Gianni Versace and another one of Donatella. Gold, I'll put up a 1-year chart, 1328.50. I think it's rich. I think it's a sell above 1340. It traded a 17-week high of 1345.6 on February the 26th. Crude oil 101.98. I think you keep selling it above here. You might get another spike higher, but we're going to be considerably lower further down the track. Arabica coffee, the variety that Starbucks favors, surged 43% in February. Biggest gain since June 1994. I'll put up a 3-month chart and you can see what I'm talking about. Pretty dramatic stuff. Ukraine's currency weakened 10.3% to 11.2 per dollar. In Kiev yesterday, that's the lowest level since it was introduced in 1996. Data compiled by Bloomberg shows. And there's a lot of drama. Russia's Black Sea Fleet, of course, leases its main base from Ukraine in Sevastopol, 80 kilometers from the regional capital, began a series of military exercises yesterday in its western central regions, although it said they weren't related to events in Ukraine. But clearly, it's beginning to heat up over there. The NATO Rasmussen, I urge Russia not to take any action that can escalate tension or create misunderstanding, he said. Lagarde said, we are ready to engage. We'll probably shortly send some technical assistance support to the country because this is our duty to a member. If that member asks, which is clearly what is likely to happen. The dollar hit a high against the ruble at 36.26, the highest since late February 2009. China plans an airbase in Zimbabwe. The news of the agreement to set up the first Chinese military airbase in Africa comes amid increasing bilateral cooperation between Zimbabwe and China, notably in mining, agriculture, and preferential trade. China is the only country exempted from the indigenization laws, which force all foreign investors to cede 51% of their shareholding to selected indigenous Zimbabweans. The Marangi story quoted unnamed military officials and a diplomat admitting knowledge of the plan to set up the base. Efforts to get a comment from the Zimbabwe Defense Forces were fruitless, as spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Alpheus Makatori was consistently unavailable and did not respond to emails by the time of going to press. The website speculated China could be positioning itself for future gunboat diplomacy where its military presence would give it bargaining power against superpowers like the US. It would also be safeguarding its significant economic interests in Zimbabwe and the rest of Africa. And I'll put up a photograph of the airstrip at Marangi, which is apparently sophisticated radar systems and ultra-modern facilities. My conclusions are, well. And I think the first point is that China is obviously seeking to counter the hard power deficit in Africa, something I referred to with CCTV, ironically enough, June 18th, 2012, when I said I don't know when the penny dropped, and I was referring to the US's response to China's advance on the continent. I said, taking a broader sweep, it is clear that the US and US Africa Command have carved out a much more forward position on the African continent. In some respects, Barack Obama's pivot to Asia detours through Africa. China has made a parabolic advance across the African continent, and one of the desired side effects of staunching the Al-Qaeda advance is that it also counters the Chinese advance via the insertion of US hard power. The US cannot challenge China's extreme dollar diplomacy, but it can insert hard power with which it can tilt the pitch. Now, returning to Africa, I'm saying US Africa Command was set up under a previous president's watch. I think the penny dropped rate China's extraordinary surge in Africa only quite recently, or in the last 24 months. Therefore, I think it's interesting how Africa has now become front and center of the geopolitical global puzzle and the collision between US hard power and China's soft power. And I said in an interview, it's a very complex collision, and I think if it's a game of money, then China wins, because China is the banker. But if it's a game of using hard power, America's going to win it in the short term. And I think you've got to see that as a response to my point here. And I'd also said, sine qua non of President Barack Obama's pivot to Asia is US NATO power projection over the Indian Ocean. And I was talking about this great energy prize between Mozambique and Somalia. US dependency on that oil becomes less because of the shale. Chinese dependency increases. Therefore, whoever is the gatekeeper is going to be in a very powerful position. And I think that's what the US was seeking to do. Put up a photograph that I took one day on the Indian Ocean. President Alassane Ouattara is due to return to Ivory Coast on Sunday after an operation in a French hospital this month. 72-year-old leader left hospital earlier this week to recuperate at his Parisian home. Ivorian Parliament President Guillaume Soro said in a statement on Wednesday he met Ouattara, that he was doing well, in fact very well. The absence from daily political life of the normally highly visible Ouattara has fueled rumours in Ivory Coast that his health condition is more serious than officially stated. Malawi's Cashgate scandal, the $32 million heist, this is in the economy. I'm saying, it's a sleepy place in Lilongwe, population less than 800,000, big employers are government aid agencies, only a few thousand attend university each year. It is harder to escape scrutiny than in most places, so people took notice last year when lots of civil servants were suddenly buying houses in the city's new suburbs. In September, a government clerk was found with $300,000 in his car. A week later, a Treasury official was shot outside his home. This was the genesis of the Cashgate scandal, a systemic looting of public money, which may cost Joyce Banda the country's presidency in elections due on May 20th. Independent report into the scandal, published this week by Baker Tilly, British accountancy firm, describes the scale of the theft and how it operated. Drawing on a sample of 501 suspicious transactions between April and September, the auditors found that around 6.1 billion kwacha, $14.5 million, had been paid up to 16 companies for services that had not been supplied. Payments with no further documents accounted for a further 4 million kwacha. The bean counters also found that supply contracts had been inflated by 3.6 billion kwacha. All told, the state was defrauded of around $32 million, almost 1% of Malawi's annual GDP, in just 6 months. A central element of the fraud was the manipulation of a government software system that was supposed to help control spending. In a typical Cashgate transaction, the accounts of the Tourism Ministry or the Cabinet Office were hacked into, Hackers found a budget allocation saved for paper clips and generated bogus payment orders until the allowance was exhausted. A check was then raised and paid into the bank of a dormant company used solely for money laundering. Money was cashed and the transactions then erased from the accounts so the fraud could be repeated. Terrible story, and I think Joyce Bande has a lot of questions to answer, which she seemingly is ducking. South African all shares up 1.81% in 2014. Dollar versus Rand were much firmer at 10.71, but I think we're going to run out of steam around here. The Egyptian pound firm at 696.185. The Egyptian stock market is up a mighty 19.89% in 2014. It's Africa's best. Nigeria all share down 5.9%, and obviously lots of trials and tribulations. Already $2 billion of the $9 billion in foreign cash invested in Nigerian bonds has moved out. Bankers predict more will follow. The Naira plunged to an all-time low of 169 on February the 20th, and I think the problems are going to continue because it seems the politicians have won out, and that is a win for a lack of for opacity. Ghana Stock Exchange up 12.67% in 2014. I like this, well, I didn't like it, but it's pretty horrendous. A photograph from Doctors Without Borders from Sunday of its burnt-out medical storage area in Leer, South Sudan. Malakal is deserted, with houses burned throughout and countless dead bodies strewn in the streets. I can find no words to describe the brutality in Malakal, which has left in its wake a ransacked city and a thoroughly traumatized people. The atrocities committed in Bor are just one example of brutality unfolding across the country at the hands of both national army and anti-government forces. Political tensions, of course, erupted in December, but it really is appalling, and I think it's going to be very difficult to put that genie back in the bottle, actually. Zambia's gross domestic product is now estimated to be over 25% bigger after a rebasing exercise that updated the base year from 1994 to 2010. Russia's VTB Rostec have bought 20% in Angola's Banco Privado Atlantico. They've really been aggressive, VTB, in positioning themselves in Angola. The World Bank has postponed a $90 million loan to Uganda over its tough new anti-gay law that has drawn criticism from around the world. So you can see the consequences of introducing that law, which, by the way, 98% of Ugandans support. Equity Bank reported full-year profit after tax up 9.9132% yesterday. They've increased the dividend by 20%, EPS up 10.122%, staff costs up 26.293%, so it's expanding still, and on a P of sub 9, I think it's relatively inexpensive. Following the results, equity has a P of 8.9 and price to book of 2.3, compared to 11.8p Barclays and 2.8 price to book, and KCB 9.3p and 2.1 price to book. BAT reported full year earnings of profit before tax was up 15.061%, and dividend increased 13.846%. They said they achieved a 3.1% improvement in operating margin, reflecting improved mix on turnover and cost-saving benefits. Strong and solid results, 5.79% of yield with that final dividend will support the price. Uchumi reported first half profit before tax down 18.95%. Earnings per share down 20%, little softer than one might have liked, but the value proposition behind Uchumi remains there. Unga reported first half profit before tax up 52.55%. There's been a lot of buying of Unga of late. It's rallied to all-time highs, and obviously the market had some kind of premonition of what was going to happen there. Nairobi All shares up 3.26% in 2014. The NSE 20 is down 0.023%, but is looking as if it's going to go into positive territory. Yesterday, we had a pretty strong session. Pan Africa, which is up 55.55% this year. CFC Stanbic up 25.287% this year. Diamond Trust up 20.833% this year. All set fresh all-time closing highs. Mumia Sugar ramped up 9.123% yesterday. bounced about 21% since its results, and it's up another 9% today. So that's been pretty impressive, I must say. Safaricom unchanged at 11.65, but I think it's headed back to 12.45, its all-time high. TPS Serena rallied 4.17% to close at 50. It's moved up nicely. I think it's going towards 60. Kenya Airways very strong, up 0.84% yesterday, but interestingly was trading at 12.60 at the finale. It's around 12.50 today. There were many more buyers than sellers. KCB reported results. We've already spoken about that. Equity Bank closed unchanged at 32, and they've reported results now, which I think were better than the market expected. And finally, Kengen and KPLC, which reported first half results. Kengen eased 0.45%, and it's down 19.926% in 2014. Results were soft. Expect more softness. KPLC, by contrast, firm 0.33%. Profits down marginally, but actually I think there's a sentiment change towards Kenya Power. I herewith wish you a wonderful weekend and speak to you on Monday.